The most painful theme park ride deaths ever. The water park horror. On what was supposed to be a bright and joyful summer day, a family arrived at the Schlitterbahn water park in Kansas City, Kansas. It was August, the kind of day when children's laughter echoed through slides and pools, and families soaked in the sun. The 10-year-old boy had been looking forward to it. Full of energy and excitement, he was ready to take on the park's most famous attraction, Verrückt. Verrückt wasn't just any water slide. Towering at 168 feet, it was the tallest in the world, a ride so steep and extreme that its very name translated from German to insane. Riders, strapped into rafts that held 3 people, were hurled down the near-vertical drop at speeds reaching 65 miles per hour. To thrill seekers, it was the ultimate test of courage. But that day, adventure turned into nightmare. The boy boarded the raft with 2 adult women, strangers who had been paired with him to complete the 3-person seating. As the raft was released, it rocketed down the towering slope, gathering impossible speed. Somewhere between the drop and the rise that followed, tragedy struck. He suffered a fatal neck injury. He had been decapitated. His small body was discovered at the bottom of the slide's pool, while the 2 women with him were left with minor facial injuries. The water park, bustling just moments before, fell into chaos. Screams, confusion, and disbelief rippled through the crowd. How could such a tragedy happen on a ride advertised as a marvel of engineering? The safety harnesses were unreliable. Some even claimed that the straps across the shoulders and waist weren't working properly that very day. Investigators began digging into the design and maintenance of Verrückt, uncovering disturbing flaws in the process. The boy's death shook not only his family, but also the community. He was the son of Kansas state lawmaker Scott Schwab, who had brought his family to Schlitterbahn for Elected Officials Day. By November of that year, Schlitterbahn announced that Verrückt would be permanently decommissioned. The ride that was once a point of pride had become a symbol of tragedy. Legal battles followed, and eventually, a historic settlement was reached. Nearly $20 million was paid to the family by the companies tied to Schlitterbahn, the general contractor, the raft manufacturer, and the ride's consultant. It was one of the largest wrongful death settlements involving a minor in Kansas or Missouri. Dreamworld's darkest day. For decades, it was the jewel of Australia's Gold Coast, a place where families flocked for sunshine, thrills, and unforgettable memories. But on October 25, 2016, it turned into something so tragic that the day would forever be marked as the worst accident in Australian theme park history since the 1979 Sydney Ghost train fire. The ride at the center of it all was the Thunder River Rapids, a family favorite. That afternoon, 6 people boarded one of the rafts. Among them were 4 adults and 2 children. The disaster started with a simple but deadly malfunction. One of the 2 massive water pumps that kept the ride flowing suddenly failed. With the pump down, the water level dropped too quickly. This caused one empty raft to get stuck on the ride's support rails, stranded near the end of the conveyor belt that pulled the rafts toward the unloading platform. At first, no one noticed. Guests in line watched, unaware that disaster was about to unfold. Then, less than a minute later, another raft appeared, this one carrying the 6 passengers. It floated forward, pulled by the conveyor, directly into the stranded raft. The collision should have been nothing more than a bump, but instead, the conveyor kept moving, forcing the occupied raft upward. It tilted higher and higher until, horrifyingly, it was pushed into a vertical position. The adults inside had no chance. In seconds, 2 of them were thrown out and crushed between the raft and the machinery below. The other 2 were pinned inside as the conveyor dragged the raft against the structure, crushing them with enormous force. The screams were immediate, piercing, and unforgettable. Onlookers shouted for help, while operators rushed to shut down the conveyor. The 2 children, somehow still trapped inside, clung to each other in terror as their raft hung at a near vertical angle. They were the only survivors. Though physically unharmed, the horror of what they witnessed would scar them for life. By the time paramedics and emergency crews arrived, it was too late. The 4 adults were already gone, their bodies disfigured by the crushing force of the machinery. Witnesses described the scene as unbearable, something no one should ever have to see. News of the disaster spread across Australia within hours. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull issued a statement of sorrow, and Gold Coast Mayor Tom Tate promised support for the families. Dreamworld shut its gates immediately. Plans to reopen within days were scrapped when police declared the ride a crime scene. What followed was a storm of investigations, lawsuits, and national outrage. Safety audits revealed alarming flaws. Theme parks across Australia faced renewed scrutiny. Even Busch Gardens in Florida shut down its own river rapid rides temporarily, fearing a similar malfunction. The Thunder River Rapids ride never reopened. Out of respect for the victims, Dreamworld's operators announced it would be demolished. In 2018, the ride was torn down, leaving only memories of tragedy in its place. But closure didn't come quickly. In 2020, Dreamworld's parent company, Ardent Leisure, pleaded guilty to breaching workplace health and safety laws. They were fined $3.6 million, the largest penalty of its kind in Australian history, and paid millions more in settlements to victims' families, emergency responders, and traumatized witnesses. The Battersea Park Big Dipper disaster. It was a sunny afternoon on May 30th, 1972. Battersea Park in London was alive with laughter, ice cream stands, and the clinking sound of coins at the funfair stalls. Families had come from all over to enjoy the rides, and among the most popular was the John Collins Big Dipper roller coaster. Built in 1951 for the Festival of Britain, it was the pride of the park, a wooden giant towering over the funfair, promising thrills, screams, and memories. But that day, the memories it created would be one of terror. A train full of children was being pulled to the top of the lift hill, clanking slowly upward as the chain haulage rope tugged the carriages into the sky. Riders fidgeted with excitement, ready for the plunge and the rush that would follow. But halfway up, something went wrong. The rope suddenly snapped. For a split second, there was silence. Then came the dreadful sound of wood groaning and steel clattering as the train, freed from its haulage, began to roll backwards. The emergency rollback brake, meant to stop the train in exactly this kind of situation, didn't engage. The brakeman on duty tried desperately to pull the lever, yanking with all his strength, but the mechanism refused to catch. Passengers looked around in panic as the carriage picked up speed. As soon as they started shooting backwards, everything went into slow motion. The brakeman desperately tried to put the brake on, but it wasn't working. People were groaning and hanging over the edge. It was awful. The train roared backwards down the track, faster and faster, until disaster struck. As it hit a curve near the station, the last carriage jumped the rails, smashing through a flimsy wooden barrier. The middle carriages were lifted off the track too, crashing violently on top of the rear one. Splintered wood and twisted metal rained down, mixing with the screams of children. Some passengers were thrown clear, landing hard on the ground, while others were crushed beneath the wreckage. 5 children were killed instantly. 13 more were injured, some so bad that their lives would never be the same. One girl, who initially survived the impact, stumbled onto a pedestrian walkway for help, but the structure was so rotted and unsafe that the railing gave way and she fell to her death. Survivors described scenes of horror, children groaning in pain, limp bodies dangling from the wreckage, and blood smeared across the splintered timbers of the once beloved ride. When investigators arrived, what they found was shocking. The ride had been a disaster waiting to happen. After a fire damaged the Big Dipper in 1970, the owners had replaced parts of it with second-hand stock more than 50 years old. A detailed inspection after the crash revealed 51 separate faults on the ride. Safety measures like the dog brake had failed completely, and the structure itself was dangerously decayed. The tragedy shook London. 3 men, the ride's manager, its inspecting engineer, and another operator, were charged with manslaughter. But as the trial unfolded at the Old Bailey, the story only grew darker. Testimony revealed that the Big Dipper had already shown signs of failure in the weeks before the crash. There had even been another incident where a train had rolled backward without being stopped by the brake. Reports surfaced that management often drank on the job, and some of the young workers were allegedly using drugs while running the rides. Even worse, the brakeman who had been on duty during the accident wasn't questioned properly afterward. He had simply been told to leave. Despite all of this, in November 1973, the accused men were acquitted. Survivors and families were left outraged, forced to accept that no one would be held criminally responsible for the deaths of 5 children. Years later, one victim who had survived but suffered life-changing injuries sued the owner's son in civil court, eventually winning damages of just £5,500. The fun fair never recovered. Its reputation collapsed along with the trust of the public. By 1974, just 2 years after the tragedy, Battersea Fun Fair shut its gates for good. The Big Dipper itself was replaced with a steel coaster called the Cyclone, but it couldn't erase the memory of that dreadful day. For decades, the site of the crash sat quietly, a scar on the park's history. Survivors campaigned for recognition, and finally, on the 50th anniversary of the disaster in 2022, a cherry tree was planted at the site. A small plaque was placed nearby, commemorating the 5 children who never went home that day.